Hey guys, it's Mike here, and in this video, I'm going to be giving my thoughts on Dragon Ball Magic, or what is being talked about, the potential new series for the Dragon Ball franchise, which itself is going to be a web anime. And basically, everything that's been reported thus far, and not just that, but additionally, everything that we are going to be not only hearing, but also my speculation about what exactly is going to unfold, and, some of what we've heard thus far, good, bad, or something in between. But with that being said, guys, if you're new to this channel, consider subscribing and enabling all notifications. That way, you could stay up to date with all my future videos. Additionally, make sure to leave a like, share your thoughts down below in the comments. Also, for anyone who watches the full video, you guys are awesome. It definitely helps the channel along with all of your support to go even further beyond. And with that being said, let's get into the video. So, Dragon Ball Magic. Now, what do we have right here? I put down a bunch of bullet points here of things I'm going to be covering with regard to this. First off, Dragon Ball Magic is a web anime, or at least that's what we're being told thus far. I'm going to be actually examining each of these different statements that we've heard thus far. The thing is, with regard to me, something you guys got to keep in mind is, for me, I will believe something when I really see it, especially when it comes to Dragon Ball at this point. Even though friends of mine have reported on Dragon Ball Magic thus far, even though with regard to the franchise, I've heard from reliable sources that this is a thing that's actually going to be happening. The fact of the matter is that with Dragon Ball, I've heard so many reports about this happening, or this Dragon Ball Super coming back, Dragon Ball Super 2, Dragon Ball Tooper. I've heard all that for so long, so keep that in mind. Either way, thus far we know that Dragon Ball Magic is said to be a web anime that isn't going to necessarily be on like Fuji TV or another type of station like we saw with Dragon Ball Super. So when it comes to the plot, what's going to happen? Well, let's get into that. So in Dragon Ball Magic, no, not Dragon Ball The Magic Begins, which many of you might have seen, an old knockoff version of the Dragon Ball story, which is the very first thing I thought of when I heard this title. And you probably can find that even on YouTube. Maybe you guys should check it out just for the weirdness factor. You can argue maybe this is a better live action adaptation than even Dragon Ball Evolution. We know how amazing that was. But yes, so in Dragon Ball Magic, from what's being reported, it seems that Goku is actually going to do something that we saw in Dragon Ball GT, which is once again be transformed into a kid. However, in this case, it doesn't seem like Goku's the only one who's going to do that, because there's another character who's going to serve as one of the main characters of the story alongside our main character of Goku, which is actually Kaioshin Shin, the god of creation and the supreme Kai from Universe 7. And hopefully he's not going to be smiling super smugly like this all throughout Dragon Ball Magic, because he's going to also be apparently turned into a child alongside Son Goku, and as a result, the two of them are going to be the victims of an evil being who may very well be a wizard or even a demon, much like Dabura, one of my favorite side villains, mini bosses, and one of the most underrated characters in the franchise because of just how little he did. Wasted potential, and you could see some of that in the video in the top right corner. So on the topic of that, it seems like this villain either shows up on Earth or somewhere else. We see that witches have a habit of getting into the Supreme Kai realm, so it's very possible that's exactly where Goku and Shin are, and vice versa, order from what I just showed you, than being on Earth, or maybe they're all at a party with Bulma, because that tends to be where basically every single story in modern Dragon Ball begins now. And so, Goku and Kaioshin seem like they're going to be going on a mystical adventure of sorts to other planets and maybe even other realities like the Demon Realm, for example, in order to try and undo the evil magic which has been placed upon them by the evil villain, who himself, the thing is, might not just be a demon. In fact, he might be something that we as Dragon Ball fans have been wanting to see forever, which is a Makaioshin, an evil sort of Supreme Kai, not like Zamasu, who just, basically pulled a Sensui and Sauron and Anakin combined, but instead being a evil variation of the Makayo Shin, who are almost kind of like the gods of the demon realm, which would explain why they're so powerful comparative to the highest god in creation of Universe 7, and also the main character of Goku, who, depending upon when this takes place, can wipe out universes. But with that being said, let's get into some of the other details, because Goku and Shin are not the only two characters who are going to be making up the main cast here, because there are some other characters who are going to be introduced. Let me pull out my handy dandy phone and all the notes I've written down over time. So in terms of the new characters that are going to be joining the cast, there are two brand new characters who are a male character and a female character. One of them is going to be holding and utilizing a sword, almost like Future Trunks or Tapion, or, one of the characters from, let's say, Dragon Quest, Dragon Quest Dai, something along those lines. Additionally, the girl, possibly, or the guy, will also have a gun. So you see a variation of different types of weaponry that are going to be used. Now, considering the fact that they're using weaponry such as a gun, it makes you question whether or not some of the characters will be depowered, like Goku, for instance. One of the biggest problems that we saw in Dragon Ball GT was that even though Goku was turned into a kid, he actually didn't get any weaker. The only thing that he struggled to do was to be able to use Super Saiyan 3 for an extended period of time, but even then he wasn't weaker. His base form could still solo the Buu Saga, because this was Goku after 5 years of training with Oob in the future, in Dragon Ball GT's timeline, of course, after the end of Z, which, hopefully the series will actually go beyond, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. So with these two new characters, it'll be interesting to see Dragon Ball finally focusing on some new blood, but with Goku being the main character of yet another series, it seems like there is a chance it could devolve into Goku time again. So, I guess we'll have to try and find a way to make a pun out of Dragon Ball Dragon Ball much too much Goku? I don't know, something like that. Now, in terms of two questions that directly correlate with one another and interlink is, what's the involvement from Akira Toriyama, the creator of the Dragon Ball franchise, and is Dragon Ball magic canon? So in terms of the involvement from Akira Toriyama, as far as I've heard and has been reported on, this is going to be the most involvement from Toriyama in really any modern project, in terms of him having a direct role in everything. Because when it comes to Toriyama's involvement in Dragon Ball, especially in the Super era, it has been very minimal at most. So many people think that Toriyama is like directly working with Toyotaro when it comes to everything in the manga, and that, he's fleshing everything out, and, with the anime that he was doing the same thing. That's not really the case, though. Like, sure, Toriyama definitely has some input, and, he's done some corrections and stuff like that in the anime and manga. But overall, when you actually look at and investigate everything, the truth of the matter is that Toriyama's involvement has been very much limited. He sends in notes and emails and things like that, and he did a little screenplay, as he called it, for Resurrection F, which, involved tons of fights basically just being written as they fight, which, to be fair, isn't really as uncommon as you would think in movies. They usually leave that up to like the choreographers and stuff like that. But Toriyama is incredibly involved in this story. So when it comes to the idea of, is Dragon Ball magic canon? Well, that comes down to your idea of Dragon Ball's canonicity. Actually, I talked about a video you could see in the top right corner exactly what is canon in Dragon Ball in my video, Why Dragon Ball Super isn't canon. And you guys can check that out, because I broke down the entire hierarchy of canonicity. In terms of whatever this is, you could say that just because Toriyama's working on it and he's heavily involved in it, even more so than Dragon Ball Super, then that definitely means it is canon because the creator is involved in it. Additionally, you could argue that maybe it's more canon than Dragon Ball Super because Toriyama is even more involved in it. However, on the same spectrum, let's say, on the same end of it, you can argue that it is in fact not true canon to Dragon Ball, and rather, because the prime canon, the initial canon, is what Toriyama wrote and drew every single week in the Dragon Ball manga. So overall, with regard to that, you could definitely make the argument that it's a lower level of canonicity, and, depending upon what interconnects and interlinks into it, that's going to be a major component. So let's get into time placement here, because the fact of the matter is that this is a major component in exactly what is being reported on and whether or not the series can really be truly filled with tension and stakes. And one of the biggest things going against Dragon Ball Super up until this point is that Dragon Ball Super takes place during a 10-year time skip. The time skip beginning with Goku's defeat of Kid Buu, and then, the 6 months afterward when they wish away the memory of Fat Buu, and then Oob and Goku meeting and flying off into the distance at the end of Z, the end of the Dragon Ball manga and Dragon Ball Z anime, which leads into, in the original anime continuity, Dragon Ball GT, or at least its own continuity, and then you could maybe argue Dragon Ball Magic, because we don't really know for a fact yet, based upon the reports, when this is going to take place. Does it take place during that 10-year time skip? Which means that Goku's going to go back to being an adult again, probably because they defeat the villain, and nobody dies, Supreme Kai's still probably going to be there, and so on and so forth at the end of the 10-year time skip, because we know what everyone is going to do. Oob's going to show up, and so on and so forth. Or perhaps, does this take place after the end of Z? I heard some speculation from people that it takes place even before Battle of Gods, before Goku becomes a god and learns about that, but obviously that would be impossible because the fact that we see in the Universe 6 tournament, Supreme Kai he's no longer Kabuto Kai or Kabuto Shin, and rather wished away that combination, that fusion with Batara using the Namekian Dragon Balls, which is a whole can of worms in and of itself, and kind of seems like another thing that Toriyama, or at least Toei, did to undermine GT, kind of like the idea of the Pilaf gang being turned into babies when we know they're old in GT. But, the thing is, so many people expect GT to be completely obliterated from canon, but considering just how the continuity has been with Dragon Ball up until this point, I wouldn't be surprised in the least if they still find a way to try and jam all of them into the same timeline and just ignore how nonsensical it is at this point. Kind of like everything with Oob at the end of the story, where he's 0.0000001% of Jiren's power at 1% probably, and yet we're still supposed to think he's impressive because of this vague idea of potential and God Key. So with regard to all of that, you can make the argument that maybe it will happen after the end of Z, or at least, extrapolate that from the reports we've gotten. And if that's the case, well, then that means that this is going to have a lot more stakes, a lot more tension, but you do have to wonder, what about every other main character in the story? Where are they going to be? So it could be canon adjacent in a sense, or maybe Toriyama is creating an entirely new continuity, almost kind of like a JoJo or something like that, where it's canon to its own continuity, its own timeline, its own spin-off of a sorts, but in the main timeline placement, it's almost like the movies, where you could try and argue that BoJack or Cooler or something like that happened, but ultimately it still doesn't fit in the story and was never a part of the true continuity. So in terms of the canonicity and the timeline placement, it's up for debate, or at least, we're not going to know until they make the official announcement at the New York Comic Con and break it down. But I really hope it isn't during the 10-year time skip, because I've been sick of that 10-year time skip since close to when Dragon Ball Super began. I gave it a little bit of a break at first, but now it's let's move forward, let's move on, and watch it be during the 5 to 10 year time skip between Goku flying away with Oob and Dragon Ball GT. And the whole time they're trust this, guys, GT isn't canon. And imagine, it would be kind of funny if in the exact same timeline, the exact same story, Goku gets switched into a kid twice. But I have a feeling that's not quite what they're going to do. So let's talk about the episode length. So in terms of the episodes themselves, a lot of people might be concerned because of the fact that they're wondering, for example, if, let's say, these are going to be Dragon Ball Super length episodes, or perhaps are they going to be Dragon Ball Heroes length episodes? Well, actually, based upon everything I've heard, what I will say is that it seems like it's actually if you smash both them together, because from what I've seen reported on thus far from multiple different sources who've reported this story, is that Dragon Ball Magic is actually going to have bare minimum 20-ish minutes episodes. I've even seen people saying up to 45 minutes. Now that's a really interesting thing, because I can't recall, aside from specials, ever getting episodes of of Dragon Ball that lasts that long, unless you count the 1 hour special, which is not the type of special I was referring to in the Tournament of Power, or, for example, for English dub fans, when it switched over to Funimation from the Ocean dub, we had that like 45 plus minute episode where they combined two of them together during the Goku versus Ginyu fight. For any old school fans like me, let me know in the comments if you remember that when it first happened on Cartoon Network. Nonetheless, the fact of the matter is that I think that that's great if that's the case, that we actually get longer episodes, because that is going to be awesome in terms of being able to have time to flesh out the events. And it's not like you can exactly have filler in this type of story, right? Because it's all just brand new. This is the source material itself. So at the end of the day, if there's no filler, well, give me as long of an episode as you possibly can. Give me a 6-hour episode. And then hopefully not about 4 of those being commercials. But yeah, in terms of that, how many numbers of episodes are we going to get? Are we going to get multiple cores? Are we going to get an ongoing series? Well, again, the reports are saying right now that it could be up to 15 episodes. So based upon the reports I've been seeing, or the different, rumors, let's say, the information that's been leaked, it suggests to me that it's going to be about a core, which, for anime fans, a core is like, about 12 episodes or more, 13, sometimes 14, sometimes even 15, which is basically like a quarter of a year that it takes up if it was being aired weekly. Additionally, oftentimes anime used to be about 26 episodes that they would release at a time, sometimes 24 or 28. So this seems to kind of line up with that. And that leads me to think that, maybe what they're doing is they're setting it up in a sense to where, if the first season does really well, we'll get even more. And that also lends the idea to future spin-offs too. I've been talking about this for years, and if I remember correctly, I did a video a while ago, I couldn't find it before doing this, where I talked about an idea that's actually really similar, where an evil wizard would show up on the earth and wished everyone, or used their magic to turn everyone on the earth into little kids about 3 to 5 years old. However, the thing is that Piccolo would be essentially immune to it because of the fact that, well, when he fought Goku at the 23rd tournament, he was about 3 years old. So I think it's kind of interesting that they're almost going in that idea again. And it would be funny if Piccolo is involved and the wizard goes, "I'm going to turn you into a 4-year-old. And Piccolo looks almost exactly the same. He's like, "Oh, Makanko Sapo!" And that's how the arc ends. Awesome. So what about other spin-offs too? If we're getting one about Goku, well, that leaves the question of what about the main storyline? What about Dragon Ball Super? Who knows if that's ever going to come back in anime format? I don't know why Toei never has brought it back since, it's been over for years now, and Dragon Ball is still one of the most popular franchises in the world, along with like One Piece, for example. So why aren't they doing Super? I guess because they wanted to kind of move in other directions. Maybe they realized some of the flaws of Dragon Ball Super and they're like, okay, well, let's do other things and see if we could do a better job with those. After all, they replaced the head of the Dragon Room recently, so it only makes sense that with his replacement comes a new shift in era. With Toriyama's involvement especially, we're kind of subverting that expectation a little bit, just not in a terrible Ryan Johnson way. So what if we get spin-offs about Piccolo going to Namek and, learning more about his heritage, Gohan, investing in scholarly things, then he encounters new characters that have new abilities and things like that his ki doesn't work against. What about the gods? What about, other universes? Like, I did a video you guys see in the top right corner about the episode of Hit and how I thought it would be cool if they had a spin-off just about Hit. So with that being said, I'd love to see more spin-offs, even if they don't take place before the end of Z. What about a Ginyu Force one? That could be fun, despite the fact that we know that all of them die, but it could still be fun to see it happen. Take the thing in new directions and new aspects, and we'll end up seeing exactly what this franchise is truly capable of, rather than kind of the same rinse and repeat that we've seen a million times in Dragon Ball Super and the modern Dragon Ball franchise, or many fan fictions that have been created where it tends to just be like What if Piccolo absorbed every Namekian? Or what if Goku achieved 27 new transformations or something like that? They're going in a new direction. But with that being said, getting back to the idea of Goku becoming a kid, I could see this being a massive polarizing idea, kind of like it was in Dragon Ball GT, of course. That's what I'm showing the picture of. And on the topic of that, Nakatsuru, who is the lead character designer on GT, is back for this show as well. So some people could say maybe it's a spiritual successor to GT, or maybe it's basically them trying to do GT again, just done right. Done in a way to where it isn't basically seen as a failure by a lot of this franchise, by a lot of the fan base of it. And not just that, but additionally, I think it would be a really interesting idea if basically what happens is that they expand upon ideas we had seen in GT, but handle them better. But overall, I would prefer something more original. Take it in a new direction, guys. Go beyond plus ultra. Well, maybe not like that. People don't usually like when we involve Dragon Ball superheroes in the story, especially with Gohan and I guess now Goten, Trunks in the manga. But I could see this still being a very polarizing aspect because people hated that. That was one of the big things that turned off fans even in Japan when Goku got regressed, because not only did it not actually weaken the character, but it felt like a regression in the story. At this point, it would be more interesting, I feel like, to see Goku become an old man, to see him become a master, kind of like Roshi, and have to have a bunch of students and to go in that direction. That to me seems way more interesting, compelling than him becoming a kid again and going on an adventure with Supreme Kai of all characters, But with that being said, we'll have to just see what the execution is. And that's really what it came down to with GT. There were a lot of great ideas in GT, like the Shadow Dragons, like Baby, villains coming back from hell. But so much of it was just poorly executed. Exploring the universe and fighting new villains. And Goku, should have been depowered, and, seeing Oob and all these other characters, but they didn't do a good job with it. Maybe Dragon Ball Magic will actually do the correct job and we'll get that V for victory for real, because people are going to love it. I could see a lot of the casual fans who just want explosions and screaming and, giant rippling muscles. Well, I could definitely see Harold being disappointed with all these things. But the fact of the matter is, we have to wait and see not only if this is actually going to be what really happens with a new web anime with brand new concepts and, reuse concepts like this, but how they handle it. And that's what I'm waiting to see. In terms of the reporting, the leaks and everything like that, I'm approaching this the same way I always do with all the leaks and stuff. I will believe it when I see it. But with that being said, if this does happen, I just hope they handle it well, and I hope that they learn from the mistakes that they made in the modern iterations of Dragon Ball, like Super in the movies, and they improve everything and make sure that this is actually going to live up to the true standards of the Dragon Ball franchise that we experienced in the 80s and 90s. All right, guys, so what do you think about all the reports involving Dragon Ball Magic? Do you think this is something that's truly going to happen? I guess we're going to find out very soon now, aren't we? But if this all in fact does happen, what do you think about it? Is it something that you're looking forward to, that you're excited for? Or perhaps it's something that you're wishing would get snapped away in an instant, reduced to atoms? Let me know your own thoughts down below in the comments. Also, if you're new here, consider subscribing, enabling all notifications. That way you can stay up to date with all my future videos. Make sure to leave a like, share this video out, share your own thoughts, which I already told you to do before, so doubly do them. Thanks for everyone for watching this full video up until right now, and make sure to stick around, because there's a lot more to come in the future.
Yeah, and you better subscribe.